losses, but Inter Miami is still in the mix for a playoff spot. Hello everyone and welcome back to the latest edition of Miami Total Football Radio. I'm your host on this week's podcast, and I'm with Pez butt kicker, aka David Beckham's cousin, Steve Brenner. Steve, how are you doing this week?
Franco, I'm good. A bit election lagged, but I'm ready for the weekend. It should be. Just looking at the permutations right now, which I'm sure we're going to get into a bit, my brain is already melting. So let's hope it's more straightforward than looking at different ways that they can potentially get into the playoffs.
Yeah, so Inter Miami's, like we said, is still in the mix for a playoff spot somehow. Obviously, they're going to need a lot of outside help and a win on Sunday in front of the home crowd to have a shot at doing that. We're going to jump into all of that, as well as do a quick summary and recap and analysis of last week's game. We're going to give you the scenarios Inter Miami needs in order to make the postseason. But before we get into all of that news and analysis, just want to remind everyone to give us a follow on all our social media accounts at Miami Total Football on YouTube and Facebook, at MIA Total Football on Twitter, and at Miami_Total_Football on Instagram. As always, every mention we get helps us to bring you this content on a weekly and regular basis. So give us a follow there, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and leave us a review if you'd be so kind. The more stars, the merrier. But Steve, let's get to it. All right, Steve, so we're getting straight into this week, or obviously jumping into things really quickly. We're going to try to have a more condensed show this go around, especially since there's not that much of a turnaround between when the pod will drop and the game kicks off on Sunday afternoon. So, Steve, Inter Miami is under the playoff line. They have three teams ahead of them that are also competing for playoff spots. Those are the Chicago Fire, the Montreal Impact, and Atlanta United. DC United is also in the mix, but they're underneath Inter Miami in the standings. There's a game on Sunday against FC Cincinnati on the docket. FC Cincinnati is the worst team in the Eastern Conference. They're already eliminated from playoff contention. They have scored 11 goals on the season. As we've said, Inter Miami needs a win. No other scenario on their end will do. And then they're going to need some outside help in some of the other matches. So, Steve, what's the outlook right now? What are you thinking going into Sunday? Do you think they have a good shot? They obviously have a shot, but do they have a good shot?
They have a shot. I wouldn't say it's a great shot. I mean, look, bottom line, they need to win, hope that Montreal lose or tie versus DC United, and they need also a favour in the Chicago NYCFC game. The bottom line is they've got to win. If we go back 3 or 4 weeks, if they would have just got 4 extra points from any of the games that we've spoken about, even the defeat we're going to talk about last time out against Toronto was disappointing. There's been so many games where if they just would have held on, or just had a bit of luck the other way, then we wouldn't be in this position. And I think once you start having to rely on other teams to do your dirty work for you, I think it's dangerous. I also think that Cincinnati have got nothing else to play for. They're ready for the off season as soon as the game's over. So they're going to be dangerous no matter what their record suggests. They're playing. They haven't got anything to play for, so they're probably going to just go there and have a good go for playing for next season. It's going to be difficult, but like I said, when you're relying on other teams to do you a favour, it's difficult. And obviously both Montreal and Chicago are in the mix as well. So, it's not as if they're just going to have their foot off the gas. So I think it's going to be very, very tough. But look, when you only win 6 out of 22 games, this is the kind of situation you find yourself in. And unfortunately, that record is just not good enough.
Yeah, and so Atlanta also plays Columbus. Inter Miami needs some help there because Atlanta has more points. Obviously, this will be the regular season, as was announced last week, will be determined by points per game, but every team in the East will have played 23 games after this weekend, assuming there's no cancellations, so it'll end up being essentially by points, right? So Inter Miami also needs a favor out of that Atlanta-Columbus game, needs Columbus to at least get a draw while Inter Miami beats Cincinnati. I think they stand a good chance at winning. I think Cincinnati, while it's true that an eliminated team is a dangerous team because they don't have anything to play for, they can risk more, they can play more attack-minded and take more chances because they don't have to deal with the repercussions of potentially giving up a goal or losing because there's nothing essentially for them to play for in terms of the standings. That makes them dangerous. However, they're the worst team in Major League Soccer. They've scored 11 goals in 22 games. They have attacking problems. Obviously, on paper, this looks like a winnable match for Inter Miami. They haven't been the best at playing that protagonist card and holding up to the favorites when they've had matches like this. So can't take anything for granted, but I would expect Inter Miami to win. I'd expect them to win by multiple goals. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that out loud. Yes, I think they're gonna win by multiple goals. I don't know if that's going to be enough, though. I don't know if they're going to get the requisite help that they need from the other teams. So I don't think that they're going to be able to make the playoffs. I think it's tough. And look, even if they do make the playoffs, and I think this is something we should touch on, I don't think that should mask the season that they've had. If they can make the play, and I said this on Side Radio last week when I was on as a guest, or maybe this week when I was on as a guest on Monday. If Inter Miami makes the playoffs, if they get in on the final match day of the regular season with help of other teams and they get in by the skin of their teeth, that should not distract anyone or fool anyone into thinking that this was a good regular season for Inter Miami. Now, maybe they make a run in the playoffs and they have a couple of victories. You never know. They have enough talent, at least top-end talent, to get them through games, one-off games. But that should not take away from the fact that there's plenty to address on this roster going forward, because as we've seen over the course of a very stop-start season, a difficult season, but every team's had a difficult year, it hasn't been good enough. I don't know what your thoughts are on that and whether they make the playoffs, how much that changes the outlook on things. But for me, I think it's not going to be looked at as a good year, unless they make a very deep run into the playoffs. And even then, again, there's still plenty to address on the roster.
Yeah, no, look, I think if they make the playoffs, and I think that you could say that's that's progress from where they sort of started even after the MLS is back tournament. But just generally, if they don't, I was doing a piece for the UK papers today and speaking to Alexi Lalas, and he was saying that all this bravado when Beckham launched the franchise, and even when it's before the start of the season, Jorge Mas saying we're going to reach the playoffs, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It was building up the club to sort of represent this sort of global ownership of the superstar and how lavish and sexy football and all this sort of stuff, and it just hasn't been that at all. Certainly not on the pitch. I mean, off the pitch it's been a struggle because of the lack of fans and everything that's going on in the world right now, but the product on the pitch hasn't replicated what the owners said that they were going to do.
Well, there will be fans in the stands on this one. About another 2,500 tickets have been sold or were available for season ticket holders and some fans to purchase. So there's going to be fans in the stands on Sunday. That'll help Inter Miami. But for you, Steve, what is the key to this game for Inter Miami? What do they need to do to assure that they get 3 points versus the worst team in the Eastern Conference and the worst team in MLS this season?
It's broken record time, but the big three, Higuain, Pizarro, and Matuidi and Morgan to a certain extent. Morgan's been the most creative player, I think. Has been their most potent threat. But Higuain and Pizarro in particular need to step up and show why they're the best paid players on the team. And we keep saying the same thing every week. They just, unfortunately, neither of them have really produced in a consistent basis. We saw little flashes from Higuain in the last game. He hit the bar, then they went up the other end and scored. Pizarro just went missing. I don't know. It looked brutal. It was brutal conditions there. Wasn't maybe his night in terms of he's not going to get stuck in and throw himself around. He's a touch player. He's good on the ball, but he just goes missing in games. And look, whether that's an indictment of Diego Alonso for failing to get the best out of him and using him in the system which works for him, or it's another failure of Pizarro himself for just not settling and just not being able to cut it in MLS. Sometimes people do find it very physical and the demands on the players, although they haven't been traveling too much, it's he's struggled. So now would be the perfect time for him to really pull out and pull out a big performance when the team and the franchise need it so badly.
So much Rodolfo Pizarro slander from Steve Brenner. So much.
No, I like it. No, he's got to do something. He didn't do anything the other night. He didn't do anything, and this is when they need him. He gets all very well setting up, nice and firm at the back, but you need your front guys to do something, and he hasn't been doing it.
Well, he scored 2 games ago, so that's something. That's something. Look, I think Inter Miami's going to have the ball. Again, Cincinnati is not a very good team. So Inter Miami's going to have the ball. They're going to be able to, unlike in other games where they're pressing a lot and having to look for the ball and try to win the ball, I think they're going to have the ball. And I think they just need to put the ball in the back of the net. And it's something we've talked about over and over and over again on this podcast. Like you said, we sound like a broken record. It's something I've touched on in my coverage of the team this year, that they have goal-scoring problems and issues in the attack. So I think they need to put the ball in the back of the net in this one and find ways to do so. Doesn't matter how, it doesn't have to be pretty, but they need to turn the possession that they're going to have into goals. And if they can't, then get it off of a set piece, get it off of a free kick, get it off of a penalty kick, do whatever it is you have to do to win this game. I think they'll be able to break down FC Cincinnati. While FC Cincinnati does do a decent job at times of sitting in a deep block and making things difficult for opponents, I think Inter Miami has enough quality, and with the fans behind them and with what's on the line, I think Inter Miami will be able to break down that deep block and find a goal or two and win this one by a comfortable margin, not necessarily squeak it out. At least that's just my expectation going into the game. Obviously, Inter Miami hasn't had very many games this year where they've won convincingly. So, Steve, anything that today we spoke to Diego Alonso, we spoke to Luis Morgan, and we spoke to Gonzalo Higuain about the game, about the season, about how they're approaching this match. Anything really stand out to you from what they said and how the team is gearing up for this one? Not really. I mean, these
Zoom conferences that we've been having are fine. It's what the club are doing their best, but it's it's difficult to get a proper sort of flow going with all the questions. But it was the same old sort of it's a big game, the pressure's on, we can deal with it. I said to Higuain, you played in the World Cup final, so you've got to use this experience to try and benefit the rest of the team. And he will bring that big match experience. He's been there, he's done it, he's played in El Clasico, he's played in huge games all over Europe. So there was a definite confidence there. I think they're not shying away from it. They're not going to say no, we haven't got any chance at all. And Diego Alonso is always pretty bullish, isn't he? You never really hear him being too negative. He's always trying to push the positive message across, and they had to do that really. So they didn't give too much away, other than they're gonna keep fighting for it, which is they are going to say that, aren't they? So that's just sometimes the soccer speak before these big games. It's in the balance, but they're not going to swing one way or the other. They're just going to try and keep it on an even keel and hope everything will pay off.
Yeah, I thought Higuain's comments were the most interesting. I thought him saying that he recognized that he hasn't had the best of seasons, that he's still in the process of adaptation, which is obvious and clear because he's still fairly new to the group, and he's shown flashes of his quality, but it's still not clicking exactly how you'd like it. But like we've seen with Blaise Matuidi, who scored in the last match, it takes time to get used to a new style of play, a new league, a new way of doing things, new teammates. So I thought that was interesting. However, he like you said Pizarro, I say Higuain. Higuain needs to deliver this weekend. He is the highest paid player on the squad. He is reportedly the highest paid player in MLS, or one of them. So he has to deliver and find a way to make it happen. If it doesn't happen from the run of play, which, again, I part of his struggles, I don't put it necessarily just on him. I think it's a collective issue in the way that Inter Miami plays, and we've talked about that, so I won't go back into that. But I think he needs to find a way to put the team on his shoulders and help get this victory. Be it with a goal, be it with an assist. However, just help make it happen, because that's why they're paying him what they're paying him. That's why they signed him to be the face of the franchise. He needs to help them win games like he did against the Red Bulls in a game that was Inter Miami looked like they were going to tie. He scores a great goal off of a free kick and gives them that win. That similar type, I'm not saying he's going to score off a free kick, but that similar type of approach or body of work where you just put the team on your shoulder and you find the way to win by any means necessary, because that's what Inter Miami needs if they're going to make it out of this one. Steve, I already said what I think will happen. I kind of jumped the gun there on the prediction part of what we think will happen this weekend. So, Steve, what do you think? Do you think Inter Miami will, 1, win this game, and 2, will it be enough to make the playoffs?
I think they'll win for sure. You're right. I mean, I'm not going back on what I said in terms of, Cincinnati, nothing to lose. But yeah, their record is terrible. Miami should definitely attack from the start and get ahead. I just can't see. It's not as if they need just one favor. They need favors from potentially 2 games, maybe even 3. It depends. I mean, I can't see it. I can't see those cards. If it happens, it'd be a miracle. I really do think that, and it's sad to say, but it's just this. They've left too much to chance and too much relying on other teams. I just don't think it's going to happen.
So yes on the victory. They'll end the season on a positive note, but no playoffs for Inter Miami in 2020. Is that's what you're saying, Steve?
That's it. And then a few months of soul searching and sorting out exactly what we're going to do coming into the next season.
Now, if they do make the playoffs, it has to be noted, Rodolfo Pizarro will probably not be available for a couple of playoff games or a few, even if Inter Miami gets that far, because he was called up by Mexico for their November friendlies, and as per FIFA rules and regulations, as of today, he is required to go. So he would not be able to stay back and not go to be with Mexico. He would miss out on the first playoff game or 2 or even 3 or 4 if Inter Miami were to get that far. Okay, we're going to steer away from the upcoming game and look back at the last 2 games in the next segment after this. All right, Steve, so we've talked about what lies ahead with the match against FC Cincinnati. Let's look back very quickly at the last 2 games. Inter Miami suffered a pair of 2-1 defeats, those very familiar scorelines that we've heard quite a few times this year. 2-1 defeats to Toronto FC and FC Dallas. Toronto FC was the more recent defeat, but both of them were played out kind of similarly. Inter Miami took the lead in the first half of each game, and then they gave up 2 goals in the second half of each of those and ended up losing. One of them in each game came off of a penalty kick, which John McCarthy did not dive on. He stayed in the middle for both of those penalty kicks. Steve, what did you think about those losses? What were your takeaways, or what did we learn from those games?
We learned that a lot of these games are very, very similar in that they kind of start well and get their noses ahead, and then they just seem to either retreat into their shell, whether or not they're being sort of too defensive, soaking up all the pressure, and then they just got hit. I mean, the one against Toronto was, I thought they played pretty well first half. Nice goal from Matuidi, and then just 2 really soft goals. The Ben Sweat giving away that penalty. You could just sort of see it coming, unfortunately. And I mean, the margins, it's fine margins, isn't it? Because in the Toronto game, Higuain, great control, smacked the bar from like 25 yards, and then they literally went up the other end. I can't remember if it was soon after or pretty soon after, and then they get the goal. And I think that was the killer. We said they needed a minimum of probably a minimum of 3 points from those 2 games. Anything more would have been brilliant. And 1 win out of any of those would have been enough, I would have thought, to just creep them over the line. But two bad defeats, and just also when we thought defensively they'd kind of turned a corner and they looked a bit sloppy again. They weren't really creating enough chances, and it was the same old story really. So it was really disappointing. But I thought the Toronto game in particular was the most disappointing out of the 2.
I thought they played better in the first half of the Toronto match. I thought that was their best 45 out of the, 180 minutes that we're talking about here. I think we learned, and I guess we've learned this already, but I think it was even further cemented here. Ben Sweat at left back is not necessarily something that is going to work long term. He's had far too many issues defensively at the back. He's the go-to starter from this point forward. I don't think he's going to get benched against Cincinnati. I think it will be him at that left back spot. But going into next season, I wouldn't be surprised if Inter Miami looks to address that position some way, somehow, because he's, as much as he gives you in the attack sometimes, it can get forward and help generate some good soccer. He's just not been good enough defensively. Far too many mistakes. The one against Toronto FC, the penalty kick that's called against him is a bit harsh. Richie Laryea flopped. There was contact, but he flopped and sold that penalty kick. Probably deserves an Oscar for that. But Ben Sweat, as an experienced player, as a veteran player, needs to know better. Laryea was facing away from goal. No need to really challenge for that there and put yourself in a position to, even with a dive or with a flop, get a penalty kick called against you. So I think that's one big takeaway from these two games. I think also Blaise Matuidi showing that, again, he's raising his level. He's finding his top form with each passing game. He scores a goal against Toronto FC, a well-placed finish. One of the only places he could have put that ball low and inside the left post, and he does so. You see the Matuidi chop celebration afterwards, and a good moment for him. I asked him after that game about how he feels with terms of chemistry and comfort with the teammates and his new teammates, and he said, he's gotten better and better, and he's felt more and more comfortable as time has gone on. So that's why I think, going back to Higuain, I think we're going to see Higuain hit another level. Maybe not this year, but maybe in 2020 when he's got more matches, more time with his teammates, and he's got more time to get used to everything that happens around him. What'd you think of John McCarthy? I got to ask you that, because that was obviously a talking point after these two games. Now, I think he's been fairly solid over the course of his spell, but on the two penalty kicks, what did you think about him staying in the middle in both of those?
It's a lottery, I guess, for a keeper, isn't it? You go one way or the other. I mean, he was a bit rooted to the spot, but, remember that Toronto game, pretty much a makeshift back four, wasn't it? So many injuries and suspensions to deal with. It's not easy. He's only just come in. I think on the whole, he's been fine. I mean, he likes coming out for crosses. He's active. He's pretty vocal. He obviously made that great save in the win against Orlando, which seems like 4 million years ago, but it was only October 24th. So I'm not going to castigate the guy for not diving for the penalty. I guess maybe we just caught in two minds, maybe. But I mean, he's not the sole reason why they lost those games, I don't think.
For sure, no. I don't want to make it sound like he's the reason they lost. He's not the reason that they lost. I just thought it was interesting that he stayed rooted to his line on both of those penalty kicks. We got an explanation for the first one against FC Dallas. It's because Franco, who took the penalty kick for Dallas, had played under Diego Alonso, I believe, and Diego Alonso and his staff knew that Jara had a penchant for shooting it down the middle at times, so maybe that was communicated to John McCarthy, and that's why he stayed rooted to his line. But I think when it happened in back-to-back games, it kind of made for bad optics, and people were definitely critical of that. Look, for me, I get it. You're either the guy's gonna shoot left, right, or place it down the middle. So there's a 33% chance with whichever direction you decide to go for or opt to stay in. But obviously, it doesn't look like you're making an effort when you stay in the middle. So I think that's why it was a little bit jarring for some people to see that. I would like to see him, take a chance and make a diving effort one way or the other. You don't get there. But if you dive and you make the save, well, then you've kept potentially your team in the game in that moment. Standing in the middle didn't work out for him in either scenario. So you gotta.
Okay, well, the next time that you face a penalty in a big MLS game, I'm going to be interested to see which way you go.
I probably wouldn't stay in the middle. I probably wouldn't stay in the middle. I'm telling you. I mean, look, how often do you see goalkeepers just stay in the middle? How often do you see that?
I mean, it's just like it's like a game of poker, isn't it?
But how often do you see that? How often do you see a goalkeeper just stay in the middle? If the goalkeepers make the save, it's because they save it with their feet, or you don't really see them make that save down the middle far too often. Usually, goalkeepers. I mean, this is just my perception of what I've seen when all the games of football that I've watched. But that's why I'm asking you, what have you? I don't remember many saves down the middle. I don't recall that.
Then maybe he's trying to call his bluff. Maybe he just thought he was gonna hit it down the middle, which means that he would have saved it. Maybe some sort of John McCarthy sort of Jedi mind trick. I don't know. It was a difficult one. I still think on the whole, they haven't missed Robles too much, I think, which I guess shows that he's been playing pretty well.
For sure. And again, I don't want to make it sound like the losses are on him. I just thought it was a talking point from these two matches. I will add that there was a report that came out this week that said Sergio Romero, that Inter Miami was trying to get Sergio Romero before the MLS transfer window closed, which would seem, if it's true, obviously hasn't been confirmed, but if that rumor is true, then it seems like neither John McCarthy or Luis Robles would be the long-term, they're not the long-term solution at goalkeeper. I do think John McCarthy's made a case to where it could be trouble for Luis Robles going forward in terms of his standing with the team, because I think McCarthy has shown he can do as good of a job, at least in the few games that we've seen him. Steve, what were the positives that you take away from these games? That's the last one I'll ask you about these two matches. What were the recurring positives that you'll take away from these two matches? I agree with you that the makeshift backline against Toronto, thought they all held up fairly well. There was a mistake by Alvis Powell on one goal where he gets out-muscled and overpowered for the position of the ball, and that leads to the equalizer from Ayo Akinola. But I thought besides that, Alvis Powell held up well, AJ De La Garza held up well, Christian McCoon was fairly solid, probably the best out of the three. But that was just in the Toronto game. I think defensively it was an improvement, but there's those individual mistakes and those errors still exist. That's my other takeaway from this one. But what about you, Steve?
Yeah, and that's it, and that's what's costing them, because they showed in parts in both games, especially also in the first half in Toronto, that they have a good cohesive unit. They can sort of dominate play and move forward and attack effectively while also keeping it pretty tight at the back. And they did that. They did that pretty much in the first half in Toronto, against Toronto. I mean, there were very difficult conditions. It looked super windy and wet, etc. But they at the end of that first half, it was like, yeah, this looks good. They look compact and great here. And then they just shoot themselves in the foot with just lack of concentration or whatever it was, and let the game back in. And from half time to have been so comfortable to then at full time to have lost the game was just, I think, was a real difficult one to take. And it's probably unfortunately the result which is going to cost them in the end, certainly for this season. But let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that if they can just replicate what they did in the first half and just keep it going, then anything it's possible. So that's the thing, that the whole season there's been signs that they've got kind of what it takes to compete, but then they let it sort of slip, and that's the problem which they need to address.
Yeah, I'll add also this: Gonzalo Higuain's passing was very good in these last two games, particularly against against Toronto FC. Just he wasn't able to find much of the game in the final third. He wasn't able to get the ball in dangerous opportunities far too often. But he was able to generate some decent chances or some half chances for other teammates with a nice range of passes, including that nice ball over the top to a streaking Lewis Morgan on the one play in the first half of that match against Toronto FC. We're going to take another quick break, and then we'll come back to wrap things up with our Q&A session and our final thoughts. Okay, Steve, it's Q&A time. We've got a few this week, but we want to try to run through them. We don't want to prolong the show or too much. So, Steve, we'll get right into it. It's the first one from @DaleRosado_. What is your favorite moment of the inaugural season for both Franco Panizo and Steve Brenner? All right, Steve, I'll let you start there. What was your favorite moment of the season so far? There's still one game left to play. Something crazy could happen that trumps anything that happened before, but what's your favorite moment of the season so far?
I mean, it's been such a weird season, with the lack of fans and everything else that's gone on. But I think when they got the winner against Orlando a few weeks ago, and Diego Alonso was running down the touchline, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? To have those moments, and the crowd room were going crazy, and I love seeing managers running up and down touchlines, going berserk and losing his mind. That's why we love it. So that was a good moment, and brought it back to all of us that were lucky enough to be in the stadium. Just why we love football or soccer so much for those moments.
I'm gonna cheat here. I'm gonna give two. One is professional, just talking about from the course of the season, and then one will be more personal. But for me, the personal one is just for me on my end, just being able to move back down home after 8 years in the Northeast and starting to cover an MLS team in the city that I've grown up in and been raised in, and just being able to do that was cool. Those first few practices, and I got to meet you and everybody else on the beat, so that was cool from a professional standpoint to just kind of get things started going for what has been a wild ride of a year. But if we're talking about just the team, I think the first game away to LAFC, I think that was a very cool moment. Because it was the beginning of Inter Miami officially, and there was so much buzz and excitement at that moment. They hadn't played a game yet. There was talk about them being potentially competing for MLS Cup, and the fans were there, and they jumped up and down with the players the day before the game, which went viral on social media. I think that if we're just touching on one thing specifically, I'd say that's the highlight. My favorite part of the season, just seeing that passion that exists for the team. But I would just say that overall weekend, if I'm talking a little bit bigger picture, the overall weekend and us being at the match and covering the match. You were there, I was there, Michelle Kaufman, Kobe Price, we were there. Kobe covered the game in person. They lost, but that was the highest point in terms of buzz and the fan excitement that there was. After that, they took a couple of losses. Then they had the obviously cancellation of the season, and then it's been up and down since there. So that's it for me. So the second question comes from Andres, our longtime listener at Colo Blanco 97. Hey guys, as we reach decision day, whether it's the end or not, who should stay in the squad for next season and who should move on in your opinion? Is there a base to build on or a rebuild needed for 2021? Steve, I'll let you begin there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure of the breakdown, but so many of the players, there has been a lot of movement, isn't there? But how many of them were actually signed under Diego Alonso's watch? It's probably, isn't it about half and half, do you think? So I think they're going to have to assess everything and certainly look. And you would have thought that he was only brought in 62 days before the start of that game, so a lot of the building blocks were already in place. So I think he's going to look to move out quite a few players. I think the core of the team, the Matuidi, Higuain, Gonzalez, Perez will sort of stay, and then the rest of it they'll just have to chop and change. But I think there's definitely going to be a lot of changes because they're going to have to be, because in the end of the day it just hasn't been good enough. I
think there will be changes. I think there will be significant changes. I don't know if I'm going to say a whole lot, because at the end of the day, this is MLS. There's a salary cap to work under, or a salary budget, and you can't just get rid of half a team in one offseason and try to replace it. You have to be smart about the moves you make. So I think we'll see some movement for sure. I think some positions will be addressed. You'll see some players come and go via trades or via free agency or via the expansion draft, the actual draft. I think we'll see some movement to try to bolster and improve this squad, because as we've said, even if they make the playoffs, this roster needs plenty of tweaking and addressing. It's just not good enough over the long haul. I wouldn't be surprised if they go after a right back as well as a left back, because I think they see Nicolas Figal as a center back long term, and that's where they would like to play him. So we'll see. Definitely going to be some positions that they try to address. I think there will be plenty of chatter during the off season, but again, not wholesale changes.
I mean, but they've been playing effectively really only two DPs, because Pellegrini hasn't, has he really sort of justified his sort of signing as a DP?
Well, he's a young DP, so it's like the category is a little bit different. The way you categorize him is a little bit different.
But you would have expected more.
Right, he still hasn't. He hasn't delivered. But again, he's 19. You're 19-year-old. Now he's a 20-year-old player living away from home during the middle of a pandemic. It's rough for him off the field. He's admitted as much. I think they'll give him another chance. Obviously, He has to perform, because this season he just didn't have it. And
but he's got talent. He's definitely got talent for sure.
I don't know. He looks a little, like, honestly, we're gonna get a little sidetracked here, but I think he looks a little physically overmatched in terms of, not only like I'm talking about like his, being able to hold defenders off physically, but just his running and how much energy he has and how much he can put into it. He looks kind of winded and heavy-legged a lot of times from my vantage point. So I know he's young, so he's going to grow into it and he's going to develop physically as young men do. But yeah, there's plenty to be addressed and for him to work on there. So the next question comes from Gerald. It's at Dr. Gotham. Is Diego Alonso still a good fit for this club? Nashville made the playoffs. Nashville! ! Having the talent, we don't play well at all. Steve?
It's a tough one. I just think he was given a bit of a rough deal and just sort of coming in at the last minute. They tried to get Gallardo, didn't they? Tried to get Vieira. That didn't happen. They brought Diego in. He only had like 6 weeks to work with the team. Then everything else. I don't think he's been given he hasn't had a completely full sort of pre-season behind him. I guess the jury's out for sure. I think he's done some good things. The team haven't performed. I'm not sure if he's been able to get the best out of the players, and that's something which is a little bit worrying. We talk about Pizarro, and if Higuain's only scored 1 in 8, and Matuidi's sort of flitted in and out. Is he getting the best out of this group? Maybe he is. Maybe that's just his limited because of the sort of maybe lack of extra quality around those core guys. So I think he deserves I think he deserves a full pre-season and a proper, hopefully full season behind him, and then we'll see. But if the next season starts and they're struggling early doors, then it could be difficult. But I think for now they're just they're trying to build something, and I think just getting rid and starting again, I just think they'll be back in the same position. So I think he deserves another crack for sure.
I'm gonna do a bit of a cop-out answer here. I'm going to say it's to be determined because obviously there have been low moments for him this season. There's been rooms for growth, areas for improvement, including, which we didn't talk about and we probably should have, Steve, is his tendency or his habit of making late substitutions more often than not, and reactive substitutions, something I've asked him about repeatedly. I asked him about that in the game against Toronto FC. He makes his first subs, and he makes 4 of them in the 85th minute after Inter Miami fell behind. He didn't make any changes prior to that. Now, that might speak to how much faith he has in the bench overall, but it also speaks to him and how he views the game and maybe doesn't anticipate certain things happening and is more reactive. So, and something I've told him and I've been critical of. I think that's something he needs to address. But we're talking overall now. I think he, like the team, he's young, right? He's a young head coach. He's had some success in his career, in his early days as a head coach, but he's still growing, just like so many players on this team are still growing. So is he a good fit? We'll find out in 2021. We'll get a definitive answer in 2021 because all right, you assume that there's going to be you assume it's going to be more of a regular season, more of a normal regular season, right? You expect that there won't be a pandemic that stops the season halfway through. You anticipate that he'll be able to help or identify and bring in players at positions that he thinks are of need. So next season will definitely tell us if he's a good fit or not. There's definitely been room for criticism for him this year. He's fallen short in some areas. Like you said, he might not be getting the best out of the team, and he might be a little too stubborn in terms of how he wants to play and how he wants this team to play, especially this year. At some point, I think it was clear that the team wasn't working, and maybe he could have changed his approach rather than trying to stick to just what he knows and what's worked for him and his formula for success. But that's a topic for when we do our post-mortem at some point, whether it be next week or in a few weeks after. The final question comes from JR Reed 11 at JRRC171, longtime listener, frequent asker, and he got this question in before we wrapped up the show, which is good because in other situations he's asked and it's happened right after we've wrapped up the show, so I'm glad he got it in. He said, "Hey gents, what do you predict will be the first line of business during the offseason with the new young DP rule? How does that affect the roster? Will this allow Inter Miami to buy another DP and turn Pellegrini into a young DP? Thanks." So Pellegrini's already a young DP by classification. Now, I think the young DP rule, and I'll start here, Steve, I think that'll help them maybe get someone like Andres Reyes back on a permanent deal because Andres Reyes is on a loan and the loan expires at the end of the season. I think this new roster rule to help sign 3 young players at a higher level that's been reported and talked about, I think that'll help them it will bring talent, but on the younger side. And maybe that will also allow them to free up one more designated player spot that they can use to address another position, be it the left winger spot or, a goalkeeper. I mean, they have that flexibility to use the DP. DPs don't normally get used on goalkeepers, but if Inter Miami wants to think about it, I don't think they're going to use it on center back. They've got two to three very solid center backs there. I mean, I guess they could go there with a fullback, but that's not very common in MLS. Maybe another central midfielder, possibly, but I think that's in terms of the DP and answering J.R. Reed's question. I think that's a possibility. Now, what's the first line of business? The first line of business for Inter Miami, I think they're going to need to go find a left winger or a left attacker because they just haven't gotten enough out of that side. We've talked about that at length here. The play is very unbalanced for Inter Miami. It's all down the right side, essentially, because they haven't been able to get enough down the left. So I think that's priority number one. Find, whether it's a DP or just someone that can come in and help you on that left side and give you more. Maybe that's what they end up using that third full DP slot on.
Yeah, they need more creativity for sure. I think they can. He can set up in a way that can keep goals out for a little bit and be solid, but they just don't have the creativity. And I think if someone's feeding into Higuain, we've seen he's dropping back and he's great. He's clearly the best player on the pitch. That's not in any doubt. But we just need someone just to be creative alongside him, or just in midfield. And just give him the chances, because if you put the ball in front of him, he's probably going to score, isn't he? But they haven't been able to get the ball to him in those areas, so that's definitely something they need to look at for sure.
Okay, well, that's going to wrap up this show for this week. Again, big game on Sunday. It's a make or break game. I mean, again, Miami not only has to win, they have to have outside help. Steve, final thoughts before we wrap up this week's pod.
I don't want people to think I'm being negative. I really do want them. We all do. We want them, for covering the team. We want the team to do well, 100%. And I hope the results go for them. I just think that everything else that's gone before them has just left them just with a little bit too much to do, unfortunately. But fingers crossed they can pull it out, and then hopefully we can get a few favours, either in the other places. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be exciting and dramatic, whatever way you look at it, and that's always good. I'm
going to go with. Well, at first, I'm going to disagree with you that we all want them to do well. That's not necessarily true. I listen. I have my family are season ticket holders, and I'm happy when they're happy. But to me, I'm just covering this team, and I don't necessarily have a way if I want to see them win or lose. The story is good from a journalistic standpoint. And that's great.
But it's better if they're doing. It's better if they're doing. If they're doing well, it's better. I love bad news as much as good news.
Oh, for sure. If they do better, then there's more interest in the team, and the fans are more excited. Of course, absolutely, it's better in terms of the team that the team does better. But from our end, I mean, I don't necessarily have a preference whether they win or lose going into each match. Now, if my family's happy, that's cool, good. But again, I don't go into games and say I want them to win or I want them to lose. I'm indifferent with regards to the results. I just want to cover the game and see how the story unfolds, how the telenovela keeps going, because it's sports kind of end up being like that. They're kind of like a telenovela that just never ends. The storyline always continues and furthers, and there's drama and surprises and great moments and bad moments. So, but anyway, just my final thought is. The Rodolfo Pizarro, we talked about it now, and we're going to get ahead of ourselves here, but the Rodolfo Pizarro call-up from Mexico that we mentioned earlier, if Inter Miami makes the playoffs, they're going to be missing a key player for them. I know, Steve, you're not super high on him and his consistency because, like you said, he drifts in and out of games. It would be a loss for Inter Miami. However, don't be upset at Mexico. Don't be upset at Tata Martino. Don't be upset at Rodolfo Pizarro. Be upset at MLS, who does this every single year. If you're an Inter Miami fan and you're new to the league, this is something that MLS does regularly. They play through international windows, be it in the regular season or in the playoffs. This is not just a one-off because of the pandemic. MLS does this every year, and every year teams end up missing key players during international breaks because MLS just decides, to heck with it, we're playing through it. So Steve, we got into it a little bit off cameras or off the mics when we weren't recording about that. to me, this is an issue that MLS has long had, something they need to address. I know you said that it'd be a little bit tough for Inter Miami to put Pizarro to Mexico, but again, Tata Martino and Mexico have to worry about their jobs and their duties, which are preparing and then qualifying for the World Cup. So this is on MLS 100%. I don't know if you want to add anything there because I kind of threw that on you.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were on the call with the US coach earlier in the week, and the MLS players aren't going to be involved in the forthcoming, national team games. It'd be interesting to know what Pizarro's taken it. Would he want to stay here? Would he want to go and play for Mexico? I mean, it's only 2 games, and they're only right at the start, the beginning of the qualification process. You'd think
these are friendlies. These are friendlies. They're not even qualifiers. They're just friendlies, but they have to prepare for qualifiers. They're building up
to that process. You'd think that if they were in the playoffs and Tata Martino, I'm sure, and Diego Alonso will have a conversation, and it's not a problem for the US national team because of US soccer's close relationship with MLS. So we'd need about 5 podcasts, I think, to talk in depth about the ins and outs of MLS. But you'd think potentially they could come to some kind of agreement if they do get into the playoffs, and the player would have his say, of course he would. So that a lot may hinge on that. I'm sure the lines of communication are open, just as Diego Alonso said last time. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
I think it's just an unfair situation to put a player in because he's got responsibility and a fan base at his home with his home country and his home nation and his national team, as well as he has fans and obligations that he has with his club team. I think it's very unfair for MLS to put players in this situation repeatedly because it's just a hard spot to be in, right? Do you help your team that's in the playoffs, or do you go try to help your country and prepare for what's to come in World Cup qualifying? And you got to say no to one of them, right? And if you say no to your national team, or you try to say, hey, I want to let me stay here, that's not going to come off well with your national team fan base. And if you go and you don't stay, then the fans maybe with your club team aren't going to really appreciate that. It's just a tough spot to put players in. That's something that MLS needs to figure out, because you can't keep doing this to players and having these conversations. And also, listen, U.S. soccer is another case. You just touched on that, but you just can't. You can't expect national teams to say, okay, we're going to put your schedule and your playoffs and your interest first over ours, because those teams have their own responsibilities and other things to think about and worry about themselves, and other those coaches have to do their jobs. They have their obligations. It's just something MLS really needs to figure out once and for all. If Miami gets to the playoffs, I don't think you're going to see Rodolfo Pizarro. I think players can't even turn down calls. Players aren't even allowed to turn down calls by rule and regulation by FIFA. If a player cannot say no to the national team if they're called up. Now, do teams eventually, like Carlos Vela, for example, and I'm going on a tangent here, but Carlos Vela has come to say he doesn't want to play for Mexico, so Mexico has stopped calling him up. But if Mexico forced the issue and called him up, he would have to go, otherwise he could get sanctioned by FIFA. But anyway, that's it for this week's pod. We'll both be there on Sunday to see Inter Miami's regular season finale. We'll see if that is the final game they play in 2020. There is a possibility that it is not, but there are higher odds that it might be. But nothing's impossible. We'll see what happens. As always, listeners, thank you for listening. Please don't forget to follow us on our social media channels, as I mentioned before. Leave us a review. 5 stars is preferable. And we'll talk to you all next week.